Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all of you. It's glad to be back, and some time ago, maybe about 10 years ago, I used to be a lecturer here. I used to come back and lecture, and it's glad to be back and doing something useful. So my task is basically take you through this energy sector development and what development partners can do for the energy sector development as a whole, and particularly looking from the Sri Lanka point of view. And when you say development partners, here we are looking at all sorts of partners like the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, the bilateral partners like JICA, then bilateral support from other governments like the Chinese government and so on. So let's see how energy sector development can be contributed by these different development partners. And I'll quickly go through these different subtopics, why energy is important and investment challenges in the energy sector, particularly in the context of Sri Lanka, and what we call Strategy 2020, within which Asian Development Bank works. And under that, what our energy policy is for the region, for the Asian region, which consists of about 66 Asian countries, and what value addition we bring in as development partners as against bilaterals or through national budget, and a few final remarks on energy sector development. Now, energy, as the chairman quite rightly introduced, energy is a very important contributor to the overall economic development of any country. In fact, if you look at all the developing countries, that's why almost in all the developing countries you have energy sector, addressed as a very important sector in whatever plans they have. And it is essential to, it's an essential input to any of the economic activities in a country, and to improve obviously the living standards of particularly the poor and the vulnerable. These multilateral banks, their main agenda is basically poverty alleviation. If you look at it, all the slogans associated with multilateral banks basically looks at poverty alleviation. So poor and vulnerable are seriously affected by, if there is any issues in relation to provision of energy services. And obviously, to develop socio-economic infrastructure, it's very important to have energy. For instance, these days I am located in Nepal, Kathmandu. And in fact, that country goes through huge power shortages. Here, of course, you are going through only 3 to 4 hours of power cuts. And in Nepal, if you look at any time during the year, minimum of 6 hours of power cuts. Actually, these days 6 hours. During the winter, it can be as long as about 20 hours. So only 4 hours power. So that seriously impacts on the economic development of the country. And so if you look around, 2.7 billion rely on traditional biomass for cooking, even today, throughout the world. And if you look at the electricity access, about 1.3 billion people do not have access to electricity, even the basic levels of electricity. Not talking about power shortage. But different investors face different risks in these countries because of the different investment unfriendly environments. What are those? If you look at the investment environment in the power sector, if you look at most of the developing countries, most of the cases you find weak energy sector policy and weak regulatory environment. When you do not have this properly, you tend to have issues in relation to investment. Then the other is obviously absence of streamlined processes for project approvals. If you want to get a project approved, probably you have to go through many approval processes, and which takes time, and therefore it takes a while to get the investments in place, and therefore particularly the private sector investors wouldn't like to see such delays. And the other most important thing is the weak implementation capacity of the government institutions. Now, particularly if you're talking of multilateral banks, when they come in, they usually lend to the governments, and the government institutions will have to be able to implement the projects with this money. And if the implementation capacity is weak, it's a major issue to disperse money. In fact, just to give you an example, the loan which I processed in Nepal in 2009, In fact, it became effective only 1 year after, and it started implementation only 2 years after. So only last year, end of last year, the money is being utilized to implement the projects which we envisaged in 2009, simply because weak implementation capacity. Of course, Sri Lanka is far ahead of that, but still the systems are weak. And then the other major issue is heavy indebtedness of the power utilities. When they are in debt, it's very difficult to find counterpart funds. You need to have money to support your local expenses, local travel, to support your officials, and so that's a major issue. If you look at Ceylon Electricity Board here, for instance, you always hear the financial losses of the CEB all the time. And when you have that, it's very difficult to keep on investing in a sector. And the other most important thing from the sustainable development point of view is the right balance, environmental sustainability and socio-economic development. You must make sure you address, you implement projects with good emphasis on environment sustainability, while ensuring, of course, economic development. And the other important thing is that developing countries like ours should make use of, or should take the advantage of leapfrogging. We have the advantage of the best and the latest technology, and also addressing environmental challenges. And we should make sure we should not follow the same route what the developed countries followed. And as a result, they spend millions of dollars maybe cleaning up their environment. And we need not do that just because the others did it. We should try to leapfrog and try to address these environmental challenges the best possible manner with the best technologies we have at hand, which obviously the developed countries at that time did not have. On the part of ADB Strategy 2020, we have developed 3 development agendas, basically inclusive growth, environmental sustainable growth, and then regional integration. These are the 3 most important areas we focus. And we consider private sector development is the most important driver for change, and good governance in the energy sector particularly, and then gender equity. That's one of the most important areas which we emphasize, and then capacity development, as I said, particularly in the government institutions, and partnerships. If we try to see whether others can come in assisting these developing countries as much as we do. Energy policy-wise, we promote energy efficiency and renewable energy, particularly because of the environmental sustainability we are looking at. And the other important thing, looking at from energy access point of view, as I said, about 1.3 billion people not having electricity access. And we try to emphasize that aspect in our energy policy. And promoting energy sector reform, capacity building, and governance. Now, if you want to improve the investor environment in the energy sector, it's important that you have proper energy sector reforms and the governance in the sector in place with proper regulatory environment and so on. What is the value addition which we bring in as multilateral donors or development partners like ADB? One thing, of course, we should provide financing to these countries, the member countries. Sri Lanka is a member country. For the energy sector, we usually provide about $150 to $200 million every 2 years during the last so many years. And that's a lot of money for the energy sector. And that's one of our responsibilities. Then the other important thing is to support the improved investment environment. As I said, this $200 million every 2 years is not good enough for Sri Lanka. If you look at the power sector growth, probably about 7 to 8% a year, and generation itself requires almost about, say, $200 million a year. So if you get only $200 million every 2 years, what about transmission, distribution, and all sorts of other important investments in the power sector? So you need more money. If you want to have more money, you have to find more financing partners. And to get them, particularly the private sector, you need to have a good investment environment. So in that regard, we usually provide grant assistance through capacity development, and of course, very important area, anti-corruption policy. You know, when it comes to implementing our projects, we always come up with certain requirements in terms of anti-corruption and so, and transparency. For instance, any procurement under ADB or World Bank funded projects should be very transparent, and there are guidelines to follow, and so we try to emphasize those. And through such environment, we will be able to increase confidence in the sector so that private sector can come and invest. And the other most important thing is to ensure environment and social safeguards. And these are very important things when it comes to sustainable development. We must make sure that people who needs to be relocated, uprooted because of the projects are properly treated, and environmental issues are properly addressed. And that's something which we really emphasize, which some development partners may not. And of course, energy sector institutions. When we support energy sector in Sri Lanka, as I said, we lend to government of Sri Lanka, and the Sri Lankan government only lends that money to the Ceylon Electricity Board. We must make sure that the Ceylon Electricity Board can survive and financially sustainable, so that they can continue to work in the sector without trouble, without depending on the government all the time. So these are some of the responsibilities and challenges we have as a donor, as a development partner. And the other important thing is that the maximum benefits from its assistance. We must make sure whatever dollars we put into the sector supports, benefits the nation to the maximum. In that regard, we always look at the optimal allocation of resources. We don't want somebody to come up with just project offhand and then ask to support it. We don't do that. We usually check the optimal investment in a particular sector, and whether it comes from after looking at our economic and financial justification. And of course, we seriously look at the procurement process to follow when we provide such assistance. And so those are things what we always look at, and that's always a challenge in almost all developing countries, particularly when it comes to procurement. We have day in, day out, a lot of examples and a lot of issues in relation to procurement, but we have very strict guidelines on those. And sometimes these guidelines delay project implementation. There is this misnomer that all the development partners come in and then the projects just drags on because of their conditions. Those conditions are there basically to make sure that the benefits go to the nation, to the maximum. Not one or two groups would benefit from it. So these are some of the challenges we have when it comes to energy sector development as a development partner. Thank you very much.